Hello everyone and welcome back to another Sims 4 speed build video. So in today's video we'll be creating a very nice and unique build within the Sims 4, and this time we're actually creating some sort of fairy mansion within Innis Green, which is one of the new worlds that came from the Enchanted by Nature expansion pack on a 40 by 30 lot. And I'm really excited to show you this build to you guys in particular because I feel like it feels relatively unique and different from the usual sort of modern mega mansions that I tend to build within the Sims 4. So we're actually starting off with this very sort of unique terrain manipulated design that we have towards one side of the home, whereas the other side of the home is sort of just like placed on a flat lot. And I was very inspired to build this build from the rest of the lots that we have throughout this entire world. I just feel like they looked very nice and futuristic, but also like sort of very whimsical and creative. So yeah, I just tried to take certain elements from certain parts of the lots that we had existed throughout this entire world and just like tried to create some sort of like huge mansion out of it. But yeah, I was really inspired by the lot that we're actually building in right now. So initially this lot was actually a park within the actual like world that it came in, but I wanted to actually turn this into a residential lot, mainly because I just feel like I just really love the size of this lot itself being 40 by 30. I feel like it's not too big, but it's also not too small at all, so you're able to create a sizable mansion within this sort of like lot size. But I also really loved the location of it as well, just like being right next to where the road is, along with having like some sort of like secretive sort of like garden area that doesn't really have like a bunch of different pathways going across it and around it. So yeah, I just feel like this was like the perfect place to build this mansion, especially since it's sort of like bright and open. The other side of this world sort of like feels a bit too dark and gloomy for my liking, especially for a Sims 4 speed build video. I feel like it wouldn't really be that enjoyable to see it like in a very dark view or like lighting, if that makes sense. So I just feel like this turned out very nice to be in this area itself as well. And I actually really wanted to create some sort of like whimsical and like magical elements incorporated within this build. So I just really love having these like outdoor balcony areas and a bunch of different sort of like bridges that lead you to these sort of like outdoor spaces and areas. And the area that we're actually focusing on right now, which is sort of just like this semicircle area, I tried to make a small little like nook area for the fairy, just like trying to incorporate a fairy house in there, as well as like some nice simple apothecary skills and stuff. But it wasn't really working out, especially since we were towards like right towards the end of the lot. It wasn't really working out very nicely. So I was actually inspired by the park that was here initially that had this sort of like unique sort of design where they had this like nice simple bridge that leads you to this sort of like outdoor open area. And I really wanted to embrace and like sort of like put that within this build as well, especially since if you guys are planning to use this build within your games as well, you'd probably replace it within this lot. So if you guys wanted to keep something from that lot in particular, you guys can obviously see it within this build. But yeah, I just feel like it turned out very nicely overall and fit the overall theme and like design of the house that I was trying to go for. I don't really have any other inspiration for building this build besides the existing lots and homes that we have throughout this entire world, but I feel like that's what makes this home feel very unique and special, especially since it's not really like inspired or copied by a specific build or like a home that I've seen in real life or on Pinterest and stuff. So yeah, I just feel like it was like a very nice simple build that I was able to create without having to like, you know, restrict myself to like focusing on a specific image or something like that. So yeah, I was just like trying to alter the entire build and just like making a bunch of different changes as I go, just like trying to see like what I felt like would fit and what would look nice. But yeah, so throughout this entire build I just tried to manipulate a bunch of the different terrain areas and just like try to elevate a lot of the different spaces that we had going on. I just feel like that made this home look a lot more interesting overall. And I just really love how we have this little underground sort of area that leads you from like one area of the home towards the front area of the home. I feel like that was like a very cool feature to have in a very huge mansion like this. And we do actually of course make a bunch of different use out of pretty much all of the space that we have going on throughout this entire build. But yeah, I also really love this small little sort of like L-shaped design staircase that we have leading up towards like the upper end of the garden area where we have the swimming pool area. And although I feel like the swimming pool area isn't really that necessary, I really wanted to incorporate that within this build because I feel like it just makes it feel a bit more luxurious, especially since we're going for that more high-end sort of appeal and feel. So the bottom area of this sort of like open outdoor area sort of houses the apothecary skill area where we have pretty much all of the functional objects and storage spaces and stuff that you would probably be needing for the apothecary skill. But on the second level we do actually focus on trying to house the fairies within that area of the home instead. So we just incorporate a nice simple fairy home in there and just like a bunch of different objects that came from the expansion pack itself. And I just really love the incorporation of these very unique looking fence designs, especially when you interchange them with the planted design of it. I feel like it looks very nice together overall. And of course, since this build is focused on that Enchanted by Nature expansion pack, I did use pretty much like not a lot of like different objects from other expansion packs and stuff. So if you guys do plan on downloading this, you guys wouldn't be missing out on any of the objects because they're pretty much all base game or from the Enchanted by Nature expansion pack. And we do actually utilize a bunch of different functional plants throughout the entire home as well. So that is sort of like a nice simple feature that we have running across this entire build, which I actually really love. That sort of like idea of having to water your indoor plants, I feel like that's a really cool feature. But I feel like I definitely did use quite a lot of it throughout this entire build, so I do apologize if they all pretty much end up dying within the first week. But yeah, I feel like it's still a very nice, simple and cool feature that we have within this expansion pack. But yeah, I also decided to keep the construction of the sort of like roofing design and stuff like that, the entire process of it within the build as well, mainly because I feel like, especially since this is not really that big of a build, and especially since it didn't really take me that long to do the roofing and stuff, I feel like I would just like leave it in and just like show you guys how I was able to create it, especially since there was like a hidden sort of like roofing option and like design before this expansion pack came out, and from the update it sort of just like is available on pretty much all of the roofing options that you have now, which is I feel like really cool and sort of just like makes it nice and easy to sort of just like create different variations and elements of different like roof styles and stuff like that. So yeah, I just made mine feel a bit more peaked, just like trying to make it feel a bit more pointy and just like made it feel a little bit more curved towards the middle of all of the roof areas, which I feel like made it feel a bit more nicer overall. And I also extended the eaves of the roofs to sort of like poke out from the main areas of the home, which I feel like makes it feel a bit more like witchy, a bit more whimsical. But yeah, I feel like it just like fits the overall style and design that I was trying to go for. And I'm actually at the point where I was really happy with the current exterior and shell that we have going on. The only issue that I feel like we had was this very tall terrain area, which I feel like looked a bit odd right next to the home, especially since there's not really a lot of terrain sort of like variations and levels and heights outside of this lot. So I tried to even it out as much as possible, and we do actually add a bunch of different greenery and plants and hedges and stuff throughout this pool area, along with like the perimeter of the entire home, which I feel like actually works out very nicely and blends it in super nicely. And yeah, I just feel like it turned out very nicely overall. And to make the bottom area of that sort of like open outdoor balcony space accessible and functional, we do actually end up adding some additional staircases towards the sort of like left hand side of the pool area that leads you straight down into that apothecary area, which I feel like is very cool because it sort of feels secretive but also so kind of just like a nice unique feature overall. And it also adds a bunch of different variations to the home itself as well. But yeah, so here I'm pretty much like adding and just like changing up the roofing design and style, just like trying to make it feel a bit more pointy, as it feels like some sort of like castle design, because I did actually look at some castles before building this build and they seem to have a lot of these like more pointy roof designs. And although I'm not really trying to go for a more castle design and theme, I feel like that sort of like fairy mansion in my mind sort of like comes to that design, if that makes sense. So I sort of just like think of a sort of castle variation when it comes to like these fairy mansions and stuff. But yeah, I'm really just happy with how this overall sort of like nook end area of the home turned out. I feel like it feels super cozy, and in case you guys are wondering, it is a completely functional build and lot. So if you guys do plan on downloading and playing within this build, hopefully if you guys do have the Enchanted by Nature expansion pack, you won't be missing out on any of the objects, nor would you be losing out on any of the functionality. So yeah, I would of course always play test it before I actually upload it and release it to the gallery or Patreon. But yeah, so I was just like super happy with the current shell that I had going on, especially once we raised that sort of like terrain area from that sort of like flat level part of the home. I feel like that definitely helped a lot with isolating this entire build to be on the terrain. I feel like that just makes it feel a bit more nice and unique, especially when it's elevated. And we did also use a few freezers throughout this entire build as well, just like going across the main sort of like second and third floor. I feel like that sort of just like gave it that extra detail that this home needed, especially since in my more modern homes I don't really focus on adding freezers and stuff because I feel like they add a bunch of different details that I feel like modern homes don't really need. But for this build in particular, I feel like it worked out very nicely, especially since it sort of like needed all of that detail as much as possible. And I also really love the new roofing texture that came with this expansion pack. I feel like it looks super nice, and I feel like a lot of the textures and the objects throughout this entire build and this entire expansion pack just feels super cartoonish and just like very unrealistic, which is not really my sort of style because I tend to focus on adding objects and like sort of like designs and features that feel really realistic that you would probably see within real life. But these build objects and stuff looked very unique, and that is sort of like what made me excited to build with them, because I feel like I've never really explored with like building this sort of like design and stuff like that within the Sims 4. So yeah, I feel like it was like a very nice simple change for me as well. And I also really love this shingle sort of like roof wallpaper to texture design, which I feel like looks very nice overall, especially when you add it towards the entire home. I feel like it just gives it a very nice texture, and it actually works very nicely. And I actually really love all of the colors that come with this wallpaper itself. And I feel like the main criticism that I have with this wall in particular is that it might look a little bit too flat, so I just ended up changing certain parts of the compartments of the home to be different styles or different variations of the same wallpaper to make it stand out a little bit more. So you would see certain parts of the home that sort of poke out that have a darker sort of like color swatch to it, whereas the main area of the home sort of had this like bright sort of like cyan or like turquoise bluish color to it, if that makes sense. But yeah, so for the entrance of the home as well, we do also have it on the elevated slope of the home, which I feel like also makes it feel very whimsical and unique as well. But yeah, I just feel like it worked out very nicely overall, especially with all of these unique sort of like stairways and stuff going across the entire home. I feel like it just adds a unique sort of complexity to the home that makes it feel a lot more interesting, rather than like, you know, keeping it very bland and simple. And I also love the different variations that we have going across the entire build as well, when it comes to the windows, as well as like the wallpaper, as well as like the textures for the roofing. I just feel like it all worked out very nicely overall together as well. And I also utilized some of the roof sculpture pieces as well that came from the pack as well, which I feel like actually worked super nicely for this build as well. They fit really nicely onto all the roof, and I feel like it just works very nicely overall. And although this build and expansion pack is sort of like focused on nature and like, you know, a bunch of different like outdoor earthy stuff, I was actually very surprised to notice that there wasn't a lot of these like greenery or like a lot of different like plants and like nature related items. Most of the items are like the actual like wooden furniture pieces and stuff like that. Like I feel like that's what they meant with the nature, but I was actually quite disappointed when it came to like actually adding foliage and like a bunch of different plants and stuff throughout the entire home. There was literally nothing that came from this entire expansion pack, which was very disappointing in my opinion. For having, you know, such a focus on nature, you know, you should have at least had at least like 5 or 6 different variations of plants and trees that you can incorporate throughout the entire build. But I was genuinely shocked when I literally filtered for Enchanted by Nature and I didn't see anything to do with nature. I was very disappointed in that, especially for it to be such an expensive like pack as well, because it's not a game pack, it's an expansion pack. Like you would expect to have some sort of nature features within a build like this, or like an expansion pack like this. But nonetheless, I did actually go into the debug option and just like took out a bunch of different plants and stuff that I felt necessary. Most of them are from the base game, so you wouldn't really have an issue with that. A lot of people do actually ask me like where I got this specific item from and stuff like that, and sometimes I don't really notice that I actually took it from debug or from the live edit mode, because I'm utilizing the Better Build by mod, which is made by Twisted Mexi, and that mod pretty much like combines the sort of like debug objects with the original objects of the game as well. So it's sort of like not really like an easy answer for me to give whether it's like, oh, it's definitely from base game or not, because I'm not 100% sure myself, because it sort of like blends it in all together, if that makes sense. But yeah, so I feel like overall I feel like it sort of like makes sense with like what plants and stuff like that I'm using. I feel like most of it is from the debug menu, but I also do utilize a bunch of different ones from the plant category itself as well. And since the front of the home felt a little bare, I did actually decide to add a nice simple pond there as well. And I didn't really utilize this feature ever before in my previous builds, but I wanted to add some nice simple live animal and like bugs and fishes throughout the entire world as well. I feel like that was like a nice unique take for this build. It's because I wanted to make this build feel as lively as possible, so the best way I could do that was just by like adding a bunch of different fireflies spawners throughout the entire build, and just like a bunch of different like nice simple bugs and stuff, especially since we have a bunch of different foliage throughout the entire build. I feel like it kind of made sense to incorporate some nice simple wildlife throughout this entire build as well. And since we have this very huge garden to work with, I also wanted to incorporate a nice huge simple garden. As I mentioned in the beginning of the build, I was trying to focus on that more outdoor sort of like indoor outdoor lifestyle, but also incorporate a lot of the outdoor gameplay. So yeah, I was just trying to incorporate a bunch of different nice simple gardening features, and we do also incorporate some stuff from the cottage living expansion pack to also incorporate some of the outdoor functional pieces from that expansion pack as well. But yeah, so I just focused on adding a bunch of different foliage throughout the entire exterior of the home, also also incorporated a bunch of different arches throughout the entire build as well. And you might also notice that we currently are utilizing a lot of different like sort of like closed off doors for the balcony areas of the entire home, but we do actually end up changing most of them to arches because I wanted to sort of like create an indoor outdoor feel for this entire build, because I noticed that quite a lot of builds throughout this entire world do actually focus on utilizing a bunch of different arches rather than using like a full-on solid door, which actually inspired me to sort of like change this build in a way to sort of also incorporate that throughout this build as well. And I did also try to incorporate a bunch of different foliage and stuff throughout the front and back end area of the home as well, as you guys can already see, and just like try to add some of the foliage that came from the Enchanted by Nature pack as well. Although there wasn't really a lot, I tried to incorporate some of the more potted plants and stuff throughout the certain balcony areas and stuff, just like trying to make it feel very lively and full of these like very luxurious and luscious greenery. And then I just went around the entire home, just added some nice simple functional pieces such as like a nice simple mailbox and a few bins, along with like a bunch of different like potted plants throughout all of the balcony areas, just trying to make it feel as lively as possible. And I did also try to focus on trying to make it the nighttime sort of like vision of this home feel as appealing as possible as well. So I just added a bunch of different base game lighting for the exterior of the home as well, which I feel like made it feel very lively, and I just really love how it turned out, especially since I was able to add some of the nice simple natural sort of like exterior lit up tree trunks throughout the entire build as well, which I feel like blended very nicely with the foliage that we had going across the entire build. But yeah, so now we're actually moving on into the interior of the build, and you may actually notice that we have skipped the sort of like designing of the floor plan and stuff and adding the wallpaper and the flooring. However, if you guys are interested in seeing the entire build floor plan and design and layout, I highly recommend you guys to stick around towards the end of the video to check out the tour, along with the bird's eye view screenshots of all of the floors, so you can pretty much get an idea of what the entire floor plan looks like overall. But right now we're actually starting off with the kitchen area, and I actually decided to go with a more open floor plan design for this build overall. And the main reason for that is because I feel like since we had quite a lot of space to work with, I wanted to incorporate a very nice simple experience when you're trying to play within this build, so it makes navigation feel a lot more easier as well. And we do actually end up having a bunch of different compartments towards the end of the video as well, especially with the different floors that we have going across this entire build. The main area of the home, such as the middle area of the home where we have the living space, the lounge area, the dining area, as well as the kitchen area, is housed on this sort of like open floor plan area. But we do actually have a bunch of different like small little compartments throughout this entire build as well. So I actually decided to go with the Enchanted by Nature counters, which I feel like looks really nice overall. I really like how they match in the middle with the sort of like wooden branches that we have going across each of the cabinets. The only criticism that I have with these counters is that the countertops themselves don't really have a blending sort of texture piece to them, so it kind of looks weird when you align all of them together, even though that is what you're meant to be doing. But I feel like it still looks really nice overall, especially since it feels that nature vibe that you're trying to go for. And for the main living space area itself as well, I just opted for utilizing that sort of like fancy couch that we also got within this expansion pack as well, which I feel like looks very nice overall. And I feel like I can definitely see this being utilized within a normal home without it being, you know, a sort of like fairy home and stuff like that. I feel like it could definitely be utilized within a modern or a traditional home as well, because it has a very nice simple detailing on it. And I just really love the blanket that it has on top of it as well. It just makes it feel a bit more realistic overall as well. And I did try to incorporate a bunch of different clutter pieces as well throughout this entire build. So you'll notice I actually utilized a lot of different simple armchairs, as well as like a bunch of different tables across all of the different sort of like negative space and different empty areas throughout the entire home. Just like try to populate it as much as possible with a bunch of different greenery and foliage, because I really wanted to make this feel like a very indoor outdoor experienced home. And I also really love this sort of like hanging pendulum branch lighting. I feel like it's like a very unique lighting that we have within the game, and I feel like I could definitely see this being utilized in a bunch of different builds, not just in a whimsical or like an Enchanted sort of like type build. I feel like it's like a nice unique feature for lighting, especially since we don't really have a lot of unique sort of like cool funky pieces like this. I feel like this can definitely be utilized within like a kid's room or like a museum and stuff. But yeah, I feel like it turned out very nicely overall. And for this living space in particular, I went with like a more darkish sort of green emerald color, and I actually really love how this in particular turned out, because I don't really utilize a bunch of different color throughout all of my builds, but I feel like with the wallpaper that we have going across this entire home, which is this sort of like nature-esque one, I still really like how it looked, and I feel like it is a very unique wallpaper in comparison to the rest of the ones that we have going across the entire game. And yeah, I just added a bunch of different armchairs and tables throughout this entire small little living space. And I did actually end up utilizing the fake painting TV, which I believe came from the Life and Death expansion pack, but I still feel like it worked out very nicely overall in that sort of section of the home, because I feel like I didn't really want to utilize a very modern or like flat screen TV, because I feel like that would look a bit too modern and futuristic for a whimsical build like this. But yeah, I tried to incorporate all of the objects that came from the expansion pack, so I also wanted to utilize that sort of like nice simple bar area that we have in that sort of like open space archway down on the first floor that leads you into the garden area. I feel like that was like a nice simple area that we can place that bar area, especially since we didn't really have quite a lot of space to work with within the home itself. Despite it being a relatively huge home, I feel like a lot of the objects that came from this expansion pack felt relatively clunky, and I mean that in a good way, in the sense that it fills up quite a lot of the space while also looking very nice and interesting to look at. So yeah, a lot of the object pieces within this expansion pack feel relatively huge in comparison to the ones that we already have within the game currently. So yeah, I feel like it fills up the space very nicely, and yeah, it works out very nicely for a build like this in particular. And yeah, so we actually decided to go with the, I believe it was the businesses and hobbies wooden planks for the flooring for the second part of the home, mainly because I feel like these ones feel a little bit more natural, a little bit more realistic, whereas the one that came from the expansion pack itself felt a little bit too cartoonish for me. And initially I actually thought that was sort of like some huge pebble rock design, whereas it turns out to be some sort of like natural wood design. But I feel like it just didn't look that appealing overall for the entire area of the home, especially since we don't really have a lot of compartments throughout the entire build. I wanted to try to, you know, utilize a flooring that actually worked with this like huge design that we we're trying to go for. So instead I actually decided to utilize that small little like wooden textured one within the bathroom areas itself as well. And I also really like this sort of like stingy, sort of like really gloomy looking wallpaper that we also have from this expansion pack, which I feel like looks very natural. I feel like it reminds me of a concrete wall that has been sort of merged with like moss and stuff, that has been like covered in moss, which I feel like looks really unique and interesting. And I feel like it works within a build like this, especially since it incorporates that indoor outdoor sort of like experience. I feel like it works very nicely overall, and it's sort of like the general design that we have going across most of the bathrooms that we have throughout this entire build. And I actually really love the shower unit area as well as the bathtub that came within this expansion pack. I feel like it looks super unique, and I feel like it could definitely be utilized within an outdoor room and stuff, which I feel like fits that sort of outdoor indoor experience. And this is actually one of the bedrooms that we have on the second floor, which is pretty much down the entire hall off to the left hand side of the build. I just feel like it worked out super nicely overall, and I actually ended up utilizing one of the 4-poster beds which came from the expansion pack itself. And I just really love this design overall, because I feel like it looks super nice and whimsical, especially since we have that very huge archway that leads you straight out into your own sort of like private balcony area. Since it's not being a door, I feel like it's very cool that it sort of just like brings that indoor outdoor experience together. And I also really love the clashing of the indoor outdoor flooring. I feel like that worked out very nicely overall, because I feel like they're also like resembling that nice simple natural wood tones that you would probably expect within a sort of like tree house or like some sort of outdoor cabin area, if that makes sense. And I also wanted to incorporate a nice simple desk within this bedroom itself as well, and I just utilized some simple base game objects to clutter it up, along with like a nice simple functional computer, because I feel like although you are, you know, working off the grid, or if you guys are planning to just like utilize it as a sort of like natural sort of living experience, I feel like the computer could be definitely a very huge help when it comes to, you know, ordering some supplies and stuff like that sort of like cater towards this expansion pack. And of course I also utilize a bunch of different house plants throughout this entire bedroom as well, just to like make it feel a bit more lively. But yeah, so moving on into the tower that is connected to this bedroom compartment, I actually decided to turn this into a nice simple ensuite, which I actually feel like turned out very nicely overall. So I just tried to utilize most of the bathroom objects that came from this expansion pack itself, but I noticed that most of the, as I mentioned earlier, like most of the objects that do come from the expansion pack feel very clunky and just like feel very huge and like oversized. So I did actually had to end up utilizing some different objects that came from different expansion packs, just to like make this room feel a little bit more functional, to have a little bit more space to actually work with as well. And although I feel like it didn't really fit that nicely in here, I still wanted to incorporate this very huge sort of like bathtub that we had that came from this expansion pack. And the best way I could have done that was just by like utilizing some specific objects that felt a little bit more smaller. So I just utilized a smaller toilet as well as like a nice smaller sink, which I feel like worked out a lot more nicely overall. And I also really love this hanging mirror that we have on the wall, which I feel like looks really nice and fits that nature-esque design that we're trying to go for. And I feel like all of the objects throughout this entire expansion pack definitely do connect with each other, and it just really works well together, especially since most of the objects have the same sort of like texture and design placed onto them. It just makes it feel a lot more cohesive and connected when you're just like utilizing all the pieces all together. And of course I also utilized some nice simple seating and a bunch of different like sort of shelving unit options for the balcony area as well, but we do actually come back to these balcony areas and populate them with a bunch of different objects later on with the video. But yeah, so now we're actually moving on into the first floor again, and we're actually focusing on the interior apothecary table area. So I wanted to have two different areas of the home where you can actually build this apothecary skill, mainly because I haven't really delved into it myself yet, but I believe you would definitely need some storage to actually store some stuff. I know you would most likely be able to store them within your own inventories, but I feel like having an actual like open or dedicated space to it feels a bit more luxurious, and especially since we're trying to go for that, since this is a huge mansion dedicated to fairies and like this entire sort of like nature pack, I wanted to sort of have spaces dedicated to different sort of like functional skills and stuff like that. So yeah, that's sort of like the main goal when I was just like trying to create this build. And as I mentioned earlier, I was just trying to utilize the flooring that came from the expansion pack for this level of the home, because I feel like this is sort of just like the basement area of the home in my opinion. And we could have went for the dark sort of like cobble design, but I wasn't really trying to make it feel that sort of outdoorsy. I feel like this really fit the design that I was trying to go for enough. But yeah, I feel like it turned out very nicely overall. Just like added a nice simple seater as well as like a nice simple table, and of course a bunch of different plants that I feel like would definitely be very overwhelming to take care of, but I feel like it still looked very nice overall for the build, so I just wanted to keep it in. And of course I also wanted to change this small little like first floor tower area into being a bathroom area as well, but this time I actually decided to utilize the basic default shower option rather than actually trying to incorporate that bathtub, because I feel like it was relatively huge, especially for this very small area that we're in. But since that sort of like bedroom was relatively huge, I still wanted to incorporate that fancy sort of like bathtub design that we had for the second floor. And once again, I just replaced all of these spotlights that we had going across the entire build and just like tried to replace them with the lighting that we had throughout this entire expansion pack, which I feel like worked out very nicely overall because they gave it such a nice simple sort of like color and design to it. But yeah, so I also ended up skipping one of the rooms that we have on the first floor, which is just like a nice simple generic bedroom. But if you guys are interested in seeing what that looks like, once again I highly recommend you guys stick around towards the end of the video to check out the tour. And here we actually have a very tall sort of like tower area that is not really that functional, mainly because it's sort of like in the center of the roof area, which doesn't really have any connected pieces to it. So instead I decided to utilize a very fancy and unique looking chandelier that I feel like works with the design that we're trying to go for. I feel like it felt like a very magical chandelier, and I feel like it worked out very nicely with having this two-story sort of like tower design, especially with the windows that we had going across it and around it. I feel like it worked out very nicely overall. And of course just utilize that nice simple sort of like grungy styled wallpaper texture for the second floor of it, which I feel like also worked out very nicely overall as well. But yeah, so moving on into the third floor, we just actually end up creating a nice simple upstairs sort of like lobby space area, which I feel like looks super nice and cozy and just like fills the nice overall space that we have going on with the objects that we have from the Enchanted by Nature expansion pack. And while it is still in my mind, I just want to say thank you so much for helping me almost reach and surpass 5,000 subscribers. I really do appreciate that. But I also wanted to mention that if you guys have been watching until this point of the video and you guys still haven't subscribed, I highly recommend you guys to, you know, click that subscribe button and make sure to leave a like and comment if you guys like this build. And if you guys aren't aware, I do actually have a bunch of different social media platforms that you guys can also check out as well, if you guys are interested in seeing my other sort of like content that I post on various different social media platforms and channels. But yeah, so we're actually moving on into the second to last bedroom that we have on the third floor. And for this bedroom in particular, I actually decided to go with a single bedroom, and the main reason for that was because I felt like this space was relatively small and I wanted to actually just like create a nice simple sort of like teenager or kids bedroom. And the best way I could just do that was just by like utilizing this nice simple entrance for the third floor area. I feel like it turned out very nicely overall and just like felt super cozy, especially with the amount of space that we had utilized. And surprisingly, I was able to actually sort of like match this sort of single bedroom with this sort of like tabletop with the color swatches. I feel like they both worked out very nicely with that wooden frame that they both have. And yeah, just like try to incorporate a bunch of different like sort of like dark red and orangey and yellow colors throughout this entire bedroom itself. And we do actually end up changing the wallpaper as well as these lighting fixtures throughout most of the rooms that we have throughout this entire build as well. And I was also able to utilize this very huge oversized wardrobe which came from this pack as well, which I feel like looks really nice and interesting. And as I mentioned earlier, it definitely fits the theme and vibe that we're trying to go for, because I feel like it has that very nice unique wooden texture. And since I really like this wallpaper and I just liked how we had those fake sort of like trees within the wallpaper, I actually decided to place some actual greenery on top of the trees to make it seem as if it was like some sort of 3D effect, which I feel like it worked out very nicely overall. And once again, this bedroom does actually have its own ensuite as well, and we're actually utilizing that nice simple gloomy wallpaper texture. And for the bathrooms themselves, I didn't actually want to utilize a very fancy sort of like pendant light within these bathrooms, so instead I actually ended up utilizing these lit up branch lights throughout all of the toilets and bathroom areas, which I feel like worked out a lot more nicer, especially since it gave it some sort of like a bit of like a mood lighting towards most of the bathrooms, especially since they feel very dark and gloomy. I just feel like it sort of like emitted a nice simple light to them, especially since they're not really that special to look at. I feel like there's nothing really that important to like sort of like light up in there, if that makes sense. But yeah, I feel like it still worked out very nicely overall with those nice simple branch lights, and I feel like they're definitely very versatile, and I was just able to utilize them throughout pretty much all of the different areas of this entire build. And we're actually finally moving on into our last bedroom that we have for this speed build area. Now initially I didn't actually want to utilize this 4-poster bed that we already have, because I feel like I pretty much utilized it in the second floor area of the build already. But instead I actually ended up going back to it, mainly because I feel like it just worked out super nicely, especially with the amount of balcony areas that we had connecting from this bedroom itself. I feel like this one sort of resembles itself to be the primary bedroom suite, especially since it has its own ensuite as well, and the amount of space that we have throughout this entire bedroom makes it feel very luxurious. It just makes it feel like the perfect enchanter sort of bedroom area. And we actually did end up going for a more sort of like open and airy color scheme for this bedroom in particular. So you might have noticed that the tables as well as the bed itself and the other furniture pieces such as the storage shelf unit and the fireplace itself is also in this like very nice simple white color with this like bright sort of turquoisey color as well. And I just really love these nice simple open bright airy colors. I feel like it makes it feel a bit more whimsical and just like a bit more nicer and visually appealing to see, in my opinion. And you might actually notice that we do actually have a pendant lighting sort of glitched into the bed, but we'd end up changing that later in the video. I also noticed while I was decorating this build that we didn't actually end up utilizing the swing which came from this expansion pack, so I was just really excited to place it within this small little nook area of the garden. And I just feel like it worked out very nicely overall, especially since it fit super nicely in that small little compartment that we had and didn't really disrupt the terrain overall. And I feel like it fit in very nicely, especially since we had that very huge sort of like oak tree right next to it. I just feel like it matched very nicely with the sort of like nature vibe that we're trying to go for. So we finished up adding that swing into the garden. We actually moved back into the primary bedroom and we actually move on into furnishing the ensuite. And since we had a relatively small ensuite to work with, I didn't really want to add a bunch of different clutter into it, mainly because there was quite literally no space, especially because I feel like this would barely be functional, let alone adding any other clutter to it. But I just went with like the nice simple usual design for this bathroom that we have pretty much going across this entire build overall, just like trying to utilize all of the objects that came from the Enchanted by Nature expansion pack. And we do actually end up utilizing another bathroom on this floor as well, which is sort of just like the main primary bathroom area for this level of the home, because I feel like if you had guests and you didn't really want them to utilize your ensuite, they'll be able to utilize the one that is like sort of like open in the lounge area, if that makes sense. And yeah, I just added some nice simple lighting to all of the bathrooms as well, just like trying to add some nice simple lit up sort of like branches throughout different areas of the bathroom, which I feel like makes it feel a bit more nature-esque, as well as adding that nice simple fancy sort of like floresque sort of mirror towards most of the bathrooms as well as just like adding some nice simple small little carpets and rugs in certain areas of the bathrooms that I feel like kind of felt necessary, just like trying to make it feel a bit more natural and whimsical. And I actually really liked this circular rug in particular, which came in this sort of like floral design, and I don't remember where it's from, but I feel like it worked out super nicely when it comes to this expansion pack, especially since it's based around like nature and stuff. I feel like it worked out very nicely overall for that bathroom. And we do actually end up changing the wallpaper and the flooring in certain parts of the bathroom areas of the home as well. So if you guys are interested in seeing a bunch of different variations of the same bathrooms, we do actually have a bunch of different color schemes, so they're not all like the same and repetitive, if that makes sense. And yeah, so I just went back into the primary bedroom and just like added some nice simple clutter pieces throughout this entire bedroom, and of course a bunch of different plants as well, and like some nice simple gnome sculptures throughout this entire sort of like shelving unit pieces as well. And although we didn't really get any bedside tables, I actually did end up utilizing the end tables of like lounges and stuff like that to act as bedside tables, which I feel like worked out very nicely overall. And I pretty much just like added a bunch of different floral and like a bunch of different potted plants throughout this entire balcony area as well, just trying to make it feel as lively as possible. And yeah, so that was pretty much it for this entire speed build. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think by leaving a like and subscribing, and comment down below if you guys like this build or not. I'd love to know your thoughts and suggestions down below in the comment sections. And I do also have a bunch more videos like this on the channel if you guys are interested in builds like these. But thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.